Upton, Kentucky is a tiny town in southern Hardin County between Elizabethtown and Munfordville. The 2020 census puts the population at 704. Situated along busy Interstate 65 in the area around Mammoth Cave National Park, Upton is like a lot of small Kentucky towns. There's a Dollar General, a small IGA grocery store, summer sports leagues, and a fall festival called Upton Days. Residents will tell you that it's the kind of place where everyone pretty much knows everyone else. It's also a religious community with at least 3 churches within Upton city limits and a nearby billboard along I-65 that says, "Hell is real," in capital letters. The sign is meant to warn of eternal damnation in the religious sense, but for Joseph Smith's family, the statement has a different meaning. Welcome back to Kentucky Case Files, a true crime podcast that explores the dark, complex, and often haunting crimes in the Bluegrass State. I'm Emily Steele.
And I'm Marcus Roland. Today, we begin Season 2 with a 4-part series that veers from our usual format. Instead of diving into history, this case is a relatively recent one, from 2021. There's also very little in the public record about it, so we have spent months doing our own independent reporting instead of relying mostly on news reports, historical records, and court documents. In fact, there are no court documents to speak of. And instead of us selecting a case to cover, this one selected us. A listener recently contacted us about the shooting death of her cousin. We think it's worthy of sharing with our listeners because it's a case that Kentucky and Hardin County officials consider resolved, and that no crime was committed. Joseph Smith's family does not. This is part 1 of the Joseph Smith case. Hell is real.
According to records that we obtained from the Kentucky State Police through the State Open Records Act, the case of Joseph Smith begins with him allegedly stealing an SUV and essentially ends with the vehicle's owner admitting to fatally shooting Smith in self-defense in a grocery store parking lot. But as you'll hear, the official account has raised questions for Smith's family. How did Smith, who was homeless and didn't own a car, get to the house where he allegedly stole the vehicle? And why was he there? Why was he carrying 2 bags of clothes with him? Was he alone when the vehicle was stolen? Did he actually steal it? What happened in the minutes before he was shot? What happened in the hours, days, and months that followed? Why was no one ever arrested, even when someone admitted to the shooting? What are the relationships between Smith, his admitted shooter, a state trooper, and others involved in the case? Why was the case so swiftly closed? These questions and more have left Smith's family searching for answers and asking whether justice was achieved or even sought.
In response to our open records request, state police handed over approximately 100 pages of documents, 2 recorded interviews, and 194 crime scene photos. Some information is redacted, and there appear to be some missing pieces, but KSP says the entire file was provided, except for disturbing photos from the scene. KSP declined to respond to our follow-up inquiries regarding certain details of their investigation.
Investigators say 25-year-old Ryan Woodrum reported his wife's vehicle stolen from their home in Hart County. The car was later located in a parking lot where he came in contact with suspect 25-year-old Joseph Smith behind the wheel. Police say at some point Woodrum shot Smith. The Hardin County Coroner's Office pronounced Smith dead.
Police records tell a story that started just after 8 p.m. March 5th, 2021, when Ryan and Brianna Woodrum returned to their home a few miles outside Upton after an evening out with their 2 small children. It was late winter and already dark. The sun had set a little more than an hour before. In a recorded interview conducted 3 days after the incident, Brianna Woodrum told detectives that Ryan carried their children inside one at a time while she went straight into the house. She had recently had a C-section and was unable to lift. She said Ryan laid the keys to her car on the porch before bringing in the kids. And while Ryan was in the bathroom, Brianna thought she heard gravel crunching in the driveway. She called out, but he didn't hear her. So she texted him. Seconds later, she says, Ryan looked out the window and said, "Your car's gone."
They panicked. She called 911. Ryan did not wait for the police to arrive before he left in another vehicle to pursue the thief. He told police that he took his .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol. He didn't take his phone. When Brianna realized his phone was left behind, she called their close friend, firefighter Will Kemper, and begged him to find Ryan. Ryan would later tell police that just a few minutes after realizing the SUV was stolen, he found it parked at the Upton IGA, about 5 miles away. It's an 8-minute drive, but Ryan said he arrived in about 5 minutes. There, a man was sitting behind the wheel. Ryan approached. Seconds later, the man was dead.
Brianna told police that right after the shooting, Ryan called her. Here's the recording of Brianna's police interview.
I was freaking out, and he said, "B, I found your car." And he said, "B, I found your car." And I said, "Who was in it?" He said, "I don't know, but he's laying beside it." And I said, "What happened?" And he said that they got in an altercation, or that he had come at him or lunged at him, and that he had shot him. And I started freaking out and screaming, and he kept telling me to calm down, but he had to go.
The man who Ryan Woodrum shot would be identified as Joseph Smith, a young man from the area who was known to have problems with drugs and run-ins with the law. He and Ryan were both 25, had been classmates at Central Hardin High School, and Smith was connected on social media to Brianna and Ryan's sister. State police records established that when troopers arrived at the IGA, they assessed the situation, determined that Smith was likely dead, detained and placed Ryan Woodrum in handcuffs, and questioned him at the scene. The first trooper to arrive was identified as one R. Pinaroa, but the first trooper to interview Woodrum was Trooper James Cameron Wright. It was law enforcement's crucial initial opportunity to find out what happened while the details were fresh in Woodrum's mind. The first chance to get his version of events on the record. The conversation, however, was not recorded. Even though officers didn't have body cams at the time, they had other technology to record. So we only have Wright's summary of what Woodrum said.
Now let's pause for a minute and make a few notes. This is the point in the story where Smith's family started to question how things played out. Now, Wright said in his report that he knew Woodrum, the shooter. They played baseball together in high school. Wright referred to Woodrum in his report as Ryan, not suspect or subject or Woodrum. Their familiarity was later confirmed by Woodrum when he was interviewed by detectives. Plus, since they all went to the same high school, could Wright have known Smith too? That was not disclosed in the report. All this particularly bothers Smith's cousin, Keisha Hendricks.
He should have never talked to Ryan. If you knew Ryan that well, and evidently they did know each other pretty well, then you should have waited.
We spoke with Russ Baldani, our Lexington criminal defense attorney. He was not involved in the case, but has represented defendants in many other high-profile cases. He thought Wright's familiarity with Woodrum wasn't particularly unusual in a small community.
That's not totally shocking or unheard of in small counties. I mean, in small towns, everybody knows everybody. And so the fact that the initial trooper knew the suspect, that doesn't really cause me any big issues right off the bat.
But he did find other things troublesome.
I'm not saying that he shouldn't have gotten a statement, because police are, they're trained to get a statement as quick as you can in a serious case like this. But that makes it, I think, even more important that it should have been recorded, so that anybody looking back on it could make sure it was done properly. You can record on your cell phone. I mean, if the officer were to say or to claim, "I didn't record it because I didn't have the capability," that's pretty laughable. I mean, it almost had to be a conscious decision not to record.
It's also worth noting that as of today, Wright is in serious legal trouble of his own. In a case unrelated to the Smith incident, a federal grand jury indicted Wright and 2 other officers in connection with a 2024 case involving allegations of civil rights violations. Wright, specifically, is charged with use of excessive force and making false statements under oath. He is currently suspended from the force as he awaits trial. He faces up to 25 years in prison. Wright has not been accused of misconduct in connection with the Smith investigation.
According to Wright's report, Woodrum was read his Miranda warning, which guarantees his right to remain silent, but Woodrum still answered the troopers' questions. In fact, according to Wright's report, Woodrum admitted to shooting and killing Smith, and he claimed self-defense. According to Wright's summary of the conversation, Woodrum said that Smith lunged at him from inside the stolen SUV, prompting him to fire his gun, quote, 4 or 5 times. Wright wrote in his report that Woodrum explained the incident in its entirety. After the on-scene, unrecorded interview, which the report said lasted about 30 minutes, Wright handcuffed and transported Woodrum to KSP Post 4, 20 minutes away in Elizabethtown. There's no record of what was said in the police car on the way to the station. Woodrum and Wright would have had a total of about 50 minutes together. Meanwhile, according to police reports, examination at the scene continued. The coroner arrived a little after midnight and transported Smith's body to the morgue.
Once in E-Town, Wright handed Woodrum off to State Police Detective Tony Harden for his first and only recorded police interview. Kentucky Case Files obtained the video recording of that interview through our open records request. Excluding small talk and the time Woodrum spent alone in the interrogation room, the actual interview lasted about 30 minutes. About 2 minutes of the interview is redacted from the video we obtained. State Police provided no reason for the redaction. There were 3 people in the interrogation room: Woodrum, Detective Harden, and KSP Sergeant Bo Hensley. Hensley removed Woodrum's handcuffs and sat to the side while Harden sat across from Woodrum and conducted the interrogation. Both officers were polite, and Woodrum seemed calm.
At one point early in the interview, Woodrum asked whether he should get a lawyer. Detective Harden seemed to brush aside his request. Here's Woodrum and then Harden.
Anybody call a lawyer?
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
We're just trying to get to where we want to come and sit down and see what we can do.
Woodrum told troopers of his family's evening out and the discovery that the SUV had been stolen. He said he grabbed his .40 caliber handgun, for which he had a concealed carry permit, and got in his gray Silverado pickup truck. Police photographs of the truck show that a back window displayed a large skull decal associated with the Marvel Comics anti-hero called Punisher. Brianna's Chevrolet Traverse SUV had a similar sticker, smaller and pink. Here's Woodrum in the interview.
So I go out there, and I open the curtain, and her car's not sitting there. So I tell her to call 911, and I went out and jumped in my truck just to drive around, look at the church parking lot, and drive up in the middle of Upton just to see if I could see it anywhere. When I seen it in IGA's parking lot, lights was on, it was running. Was fixing to go over the train tracks, and I seen the taillights of it. I recognized the taillights.
Woodrum told Harden that he pulled into the IGA lot and parked behind the SUV. Police photographs from the scene also show another vehicle parked very close to the SUV's driver's side, leaving relatively little space between the vehicles. Woodrum said he approached the SUV's driver's side door with his gun in his hand. He told police that he had expected to keep the gun down by his side unless something happened. He said he opened the driver's door and found the radio blaring, and Smith leaned over the console with his back turned. Here's Woodrum again.
I turned around, pulled back in, pulled in behind it. I could see somebody in the driver's seat. Couldn't see anybody else. So I had my gun in my hand, walked up there, opened the door. When I opened the door, he went from leaning almost in the passenger seat, almost out the door in my lap. And then what you saw there is what happened from there.
Woodrum also said Smith, who was presumably still seated, suddenly turned and lunged with his hands in the air. Woodrum demonstrated by putting his hands up in front of him.
I was baffled when he turned around and was right here. Okay. And then when I started to draw, he kind of seen me, and by the time I got a couple shots off, he had turned and tried to climb over the console into the passenger seat.
In the recorded interview, Woodrum insists it was instinct. Woodrum, who in social media photos appears to be a stout man with a formidable build, said he feared being overpowered by Smith, who is described on his death certificate as being 5'9", 150 pounds. Woodrum concedes that Smith might have been frightened or surprised by the door opening.
He come up with his hands up, Yeah. And anybody be freaked out, I guess, if they had a car door open on them, but, you know, I wasn't getting, with a gun in my hand, I wasn't getting my ass beat. You know, a gun knocked out of my hand, and then vice versa happens. Right. In my head, you know what I mean?
According to KSP records, Woodrum's friend Will Kemper, whom Brianna Woodrum had called when she couldn't reach Ryan, would later tell police on the scene that Woodrum told him that Smith came out of the vehicle and was coming at him when he shot, and then Smith retreated. Police photos of shell casings from the scene indicate that the gun discharged inside the car, not outside. At least 5 shells were found, and all were photographed inside the car. Several official descriptions, including a search warrant written by Detective Harden and a KSB press release issued the day after the shooting, referred to an altercation between Woodrum and Smith. Yet, during the recorded interview, Woodrum never alleged an altercation or described a physical struggle. Brianna also used the word during her police interview.
He said that they got an altercation, or that he had come at him or lunged at him.
Kentucky Case Files asked Assistant Commonwealth Attorney Chris McCrary, who was assigned to the case, about the incongruency in the various descriptions, but he had no explanation for it.
Ryan Woodrum described what happened next.
I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door, and just to see how he was, I was trying to pull him out. I grabbed like his hood and pulled him out, and then a guy from the fire department showed up almost instantly after that. I mean, it wasn't long.
The guy from the fire department was his friend Will Kemper, who, according to both men, went back to his truck to retrieve zip ties just in case to detain Smith. It's unclear from official records whether Smith was still alive at this point. There's also no indication in the records that anyone, including Kemper or Woodrum, attempted first aid or any life-saving measures on him. Kemper, who was a volunteer firefighter with the Upton Fire Department, told police that when he arrived, he didn't know Smith had been shot and thought he was unconscious. After returning with the zip ties, he said he realized Smith had been shot and was not moving. He said he knew the person was dead. During this time, Woodrum said, he leaned inside the SUV to check whether his wife's handgun was still under the driver's seat where she kept it. He told troopers his wife's gun was still exactly where it had been. He didn't see a weapon on Smith's body. He then unloaded his weapon and laid it in the driver's seat of the truck. Throughout the recorded conversation, Detective Harden repeatedly reassures Woodrum that he doesn't believe he's lying, even telling him directly,
I don't have any reason to believe, don't think you're lying to me a bit. I really don't. I think you're being truthful with me.
Detective Harden noted in his report that after the interview with Woodrum, he consulted with Commonwealth's attorney Shane Young. Despite Woodrum's admission that he shot and killed Smith and his claim of self-defense, Young recommended that Woodrum not be arrested and that no charges be filed until more facts and evidence could be gathered. So that's what happened. Wright, the trooper who transported Woodrum to the police station, drove him home. There was no further contact between the investigators and Ryan Woodrum other than his attendance at a grand jury hearing nearly 4 months later in July.
We asked Baldani about the usual investigatory and arrest procedures in a case like this, based on his 42 years' experience as a criminal defense attorney.
Typically, what I find, if there is a claim of self-defense, usually the person that is the admitted shooter is charged with something, and then they assert their defense, and then the case kind of works out from there. And it starts out in district court with an arraignment and a preliminary hearing. And then as everything unfolds, it's eventually presented to a grand jury. And a grand jury will generally decide if there is sufficient evidence for the murder charge, or even if there is some type of lesser offense that the person should be charged with. But that's, in my experience, that's the typical way that it proceeds.
But Woodrum wasn't arrested, and he was never charged. He never stood before a judge. 3 days after the shooting, police conducted a video interview with Woodrum's wife. In addition to the information previously discussed, Brianna Woodrum told police that Ryan had told her he did not immediately recognize Smith during the encounter. Only after seeing the press release did they learn it was Smith, someone she said they vaguely remembered from high school.
However, according to our interviews with Smith's friends and relatives, the Woodrums likely did know Smith, even well enough for Smith to have lived with or at least stayed with them for a period of time. Joshua Amaral, Smith's half-brother, said it was well known that Smith was staying with the Woodrums.
But I do know that Joseph knew both of them and he stayed with them. I do know that for a fact because I
And you're
didn't
pretty
just hear it.
certain of that.
Oh yeah, I didn't just hear it from one person. That was word on the street. That was around the block.
According to the autopsy chain of custody documents, Smith had 2 bags of clothes with him. Smith's cousin, Keisha Hendricks.
He normally would not carry bags of clothes. So that kind of makes me believe the stories that I've been hearing that he was living with them a little bit more truer.
Smith's aunt, Yvonne LaFollette.
I've heard that he was living there with them. And when he was shot and killed, he had his bag of clothes in the
Right.
car. And I was told that they ran him off, or his wife did.
KSP records make no mention of Smith living or staying with the Woodrums, nor does it appear in records that police talked to anyone who would have had information regarding the Woodrums' relationship with Smith. His relatives say that police had no extended conversations with them. LaFollette said that Trooper Wright only told her that Smith was killed because he, quote, made bad choices. Kentucky case files could not independently verify whether Smith had stayed with the Woodrums. Multiple attempts to reach the Woodrums were unsuccessful.
In addition to the interviews with the Woodrums and Kemper, police conducted brief on-scene interviews with 2 bystanders who were inside the IGA store at the time of the shooting. Hendricks said she made numerous attempts to speak to a KSP trooper and was continuously rebuffed. The investigation was apparently completed on March 19, 2021, when State Medical Examiner Dr. Donna Stewart's final autopsy report was issued. Nothing in the records we obtained indicate any investigative action was taken after that. A public records request returned no correspondence between the medical examiner and state police or the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, which might be expected in a continuing investigation. KSP did not reply to our follow-up inquiries, and the medical examiner's office also declined to speak with us.
Assistant Commonwealth's attorney Chris McRae, who was assigned to the case, did talk to us, but he declined to be recorded. He told us that there was likely additional gun testing that needed to take place. However, KSP records don't make mention of that, and KSP declined to respond to our inquiries. The chain of custody records for the Woodrums' guns show that they were held as evidence starting the night of the shooting and were released to Brianna in July after the grand jury adjournment. But the facts don't stop at the parking lot or with the recorded interviews. In our next episode, we'll examine more specific forensic evidence, the bullet paths, the autopsy findings, the toxicology report, the story they tell, and the red flags they raise. It's the evidence that, according to Smith's family, tells a different story from the one the authorities accepted that night. Join us next time for the Joseph Smith case, Part 2, Anatomy of a Homicide. I'm Emily Steele.
And I'm Marcus Roland. Thanks for listening to Kentucky Case Files. Make sure you like and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Sourcing for this podcast includes our original reporting and interviews, Kentucky State Police records, and the State Medical Examiner's autopsy report obtained through the Open Records Act, forensic toxicology research, and news reports from the Elizabethtown News Enterprise, WTVQ, WLKY, WLEX, WBKO, and WDRB.